That in just a minute. But first, everyone, to our top story. President Obama sounding off on the race for his replacement while meeting with leaders in Africa today. He is taking aim at Republican candidates, including Ted Cruz, Mike Huckabee, and Donald Trump. Listen to this.
The American people deserve better. Certainly presidential debates deserve better. In 18 months, I'm turning over the keys. I want to make sure I'm turning over the keys to somebody who is serious about the serious problems that the country faces and the world faces.
Note, he's turning over the keys, and he wants to make sure he's turning them over to someone who is serious. You know, last time I checked, it was the American voters who turned over the president's keys, and American voters that would be making the decision on whom those keys should be turned over to. So is the president being too presumptuous here? Democrat Richard Goodstein of Goodstein & Associates joins us, along with former McCain advisor Ford O'Connell, along with our own Blake Burman, live there from the White House. And Ford, I'm starting with you. I called it presumptuous. What's your reaction to what the president said there today about turning over those keys?
Well, President Obama doesn't want to have a real discussion.
Go ahead.
President Obama doesn't want to have a real discussion on the Iran nuclear deal. He just wants it to pass Congress, and essentially he knows it will be undone unless Hillary Clinton becomes the next president of the United States. He's about protecting his legacy, and he feels the best way to do this is to label Mike Huckabee and the rest of the GOP as a bunch of crazies.
You know, talking about exactly what Micah Huckabee there said over the weekend, I want to get to that. Let me play that for viewers.
He's so naive, he would trust the Iranians, and he would take the Israelis and basically march them to the door of the oven.
Blake, the president says what Mike Huckabee did was just a political move.
Yeah, he was asked about this earlier today, Trish. The president is traveling in Ethiopia. Was asked specifically about that question. He said it would be ridiculous if it weren't so sad, and that led him to basically go off on the, or most of, the GOP field. Mike Huckabee's campaign reacted to the president's reaction from earlier today. Here's a little bit of what they said. I'll put it up on the screen real quick. They said, quote, "What's ridiculous and sad is that President Obama does not take Iran's repeated threats seriously." He went on to say, "I will stand with our ally Israel to prevent the terrorists in Tehran from achieving their own stated goal of another Holocaust." So that's the statement from the Huckabee campaign. They did not back down at all.
Yeah,
Trish?
you know, Richard, you know, if I'm in Israel right now, I'm pretty darn worried about this Iran deal. That's the reality of it. And I think Mike Huckabee was, while his statements were certainly somewhat inflammatory, that's exactly what he was getting at.
Look, even the Anti-Defamation League in the United States, which is no big fan of this Iran deal, said that what Huckabee said was out of line and unacceptable. You know, it's pathetic, and yet you have to feel for Huckabee. Look where he is in the polls.
But
look where Trump is.
Now, let me go back there. I mean, Iran, it is a country that, without a doubt, it wants to wipe Israel right off the map. You know, you've got Ayatollah Khamenei tweeting, and I'm going to quote here, "This barbaric and wolf-like regime of Israel, which spares no crime, has no cure to be annihilated." And then he went to say has no cure and it should be annihilated. And then he went on to say that Israel should be eliminated, and he linked to a 9-point plan on how to get rid of Israel. So, you know, Richard, you can say that, you know, Mike Huckabee is not speaking the truth there, but the reality is people in Israel are worried about the idea of Iran having a nuclear weapon.
And how could they not be with that rhetoric? So the question is, what's next? I happen to be sympathetic to the administration's position that the alternative, really, when you boil it down, is war. And I think that the country that is most at risk if we actually bomb these sites in Iran is Israel, because
Richard,
of the concentration
that is such a false premise. Hold on, Richard. You are now going into the outrageous, just like President Obama here. There are not two options. It's not war or the nuclear deal. You can get a better deal. There are other options. Fine. We should
the rest of the countries aren't in with us.
No, Richard, we should double the sanctions and bring Iran to the table, because right now it appears they're getting everything they want, not to mention they're going to get $100 million to fund future terrorism against Israel and across the Middle East. I mean, you've got to be honest here.
No, I am honest. It's a fantasy.
They're the number one state sponsor of Islamic terrorism. You're giving them $100 billion. What do you think they're going to do with it? Give books and food to their people?
Listen.
You're out of your mind.
Okay, fine. Over to Richard for a minute, and then I want to move on to Donald Trump.
So the fantasy is the suggestion that somehow if the U.S. just got more serious about sanctions, that would really, kind of do away with all this rhetoric from Iran. That is fantasy because it assumes two things. One, that Iran's really somehow going to be talked out of the rhetorical side of things. Two, that every other country who's in on the sanctions with us, remember it's P5 plus 1, so it becomes P4 plus 1, that still is going to basically do business with Iran because they think they've gotten what they wanted, which is Iran not having a nuclear weapon. So the suggestion that somehow or other the U.S. can get a better deal is predicated on utter fantasy.
All right, I want to move on, everyone, to Donald Trump, who is just soaring in the polls there in New Hampshire. I've been spending a lot of time there, and I've been telling people, watch him very carefully because the reality is he is resonating. You talk to people actually on both sides of the aisle, I'll tell you, and they can't stop talking about Donald Trump. It seems as though, Blake, people kind of want to root for the underdog, if you will, which is sort of what he is, even though he's out in front. He's the guy that represents anti-establishment, anti-Washington, and voters seem to like that.
Well, you talked about that poll in New Hampshire, Trish. That was one poll that was released over the weekend that shows Donald Trump up in New Hampshire, surging ahead of Jeb Bush, who's held the lead there for months. There was also another poll in Iowa that had Donald Trump just 2 points behind Scott Walker. That's within the margin of error, the first time again in months that Scott Walker has been within the margin of error there. A national poll over the weekend that shows Donald Trump out in front as well. He actually just tweeted about this about 20 minutes or so ago. And here's what I'll tell you what I found interesting, Trish. You remember there was this news conference at the White House here a couple weeks ago about Iran. The president was asked about that, and he kind of cut it off and skipped it over, didn't talk about Donald Trump. Today, he brought it up and talked about Donald Trump. So it just goes to show you, even in a couple weeks, from then to now, Trump is certainly on the radar, at least of the president.
He could actually be a pretty formidable opponent. Richard Ford, I'm just trying to imagine what a debate would look like between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Ford, I don't know if she could do it.
Well, I'm not sure she can because basically she's trying to win a coronation here on the Democratic side and really skate her way to the White House. And here's the deal with Donald Trump. He is really tapping in anger with people who are in the Republican Party who are pissed off with business as usual and are sick and tired of the establishment wing of the party telling them who to vote for and who they should like. Here's the key with Donald Trump. He's driving the news rather than the news driving him. He's using page 6 tabloid tactics to make his point, bring it into presidential politics, and the media and his opponents don't know how to handle it. And I promise you, Hillary Clinton certainly can.
And I think the voters are watching this and they're loving it. They're loving it because it's injecting an energy into politics that, frankly, Richard, we haven't seen in a while.
No, look, I still think it's the case that none of us think that Donald Trump is going to end up being the Republican nominee. And I do empathize with the Republican establishment because either you try to take him on and denounce Trump, which they did after his McCain comments, which kind of embolden him on one hand and also make him think, well, maybe a third party isn't such a silly idea. And we kind of know if the polls are any indication that would be disastrous for whomever the Republican nominee is. Or if it's under the heading of if you can't beat him, join him, and you start making outrageous comments like Huckabee's earlier today or these other ones from Cruz and whatnot. So that's the problem. And listen, the debates haven't even started yet. Negative ads haven't even started yet.
Look,
wait till they do. Then we'll really be licking our chops.
Here's the moral of the story. Do not count him out. If we see that these polls continue to show such strength for him, he could be a very formidable candidate. Anyway, thanks so much, Blake, Richard, and Ford. Good to have you guys
Thank you,
here.
Trish.